Wait, what's going on here? After finishing a business trip, I was returning home for the first time in 2 years. Tim, my husband, should have had the day off as well. I was thrilled at the thought of seeing him after such a long time, but as soon as I opened the door, a strange smell wafted out, quelling my excitement instantly. Yet, at the same time, I was hit with an indescribable sense of unease. I felt like something terrible had happened. Tim? I called out Tim's name as I searched throughout the house, but he was nowhere to be found. This is the only place left. I took a deep breath and slowly opened the bedroom door. Tim? What is this? Tim was indeed there, but he looked completely different from the Tim I knew. My name is Roseanne. I'm 32 years old. Right after graduating from college, I moved away from my hometown. I got a job in sales at an advertising company. Honestly, I hadn't always dreamed of working in advertising, but a lecture I attended in a college sparked my interest. How to create captivating advertisements. What elements make an ad appealing? Before I knew it, I had fallen deeply into the world of advertising and design. As I was preparing for job hunting, it was natural for me to focus on entering the advertising industry. And as a result, I was able to land a job at a company I had aimed for. I still remember how happy I was. It was sad to leave my hometown, but capturing my dream made my heart soar. However, once I started working, I quickly realized that the job was much harder than I had anticipated. It wasn't that I had underestimated it, but still, the reality was starkly different from what I had imagined. Field work, creating documents, there was a lot to do, including communicating with clients, leading to lots of overtime, working on holidays, and business trips, all of which made for a tough experience. I think what saved me was that everyone at the company was kind. Eventually, I started to wonder, is this really what I want to be doing? But then, someone who would support me through it all appeared. This happened about 2 years after I started working. I went to a drinking party I was invited to by a colleague, but couldn't quite fit into the conversation, and ended up drinking quietly by myself when a man approached me. Are you okay? Are you here alone? Yes, I'm fine. That man was Tim, who would later become my husband. Tim noticed me drinking alone and went out of his way to strike up a conversation. You looked a bit lonely. Would you like to join me for a drink? I'd love to. At my response, Tim smiled kindly. As we talked, I found out that Tim also worked in sales. From then on, our conversation, filled with work complaints, took off, and we hit it off completely. We exchanged contact information and made plans to go out for dinner together. Who would have thought that a casual participation in a drinking party would lead to making a connection with the opposite sex, let alone meeting my future husband, which I still consider to be almost a miracle. A week later, the day came for Tim and me to meet alone. Honestly, I was feeling a bit gloomy. That's because at that time, the alcohol made everything seem okay. But meeting without drinking, I wondered, would our conversation be just as lively? With a bit of anxiety, I met up with Tim, and then we entered the restaurant he had reserved. To my surprise, I had a wonderful time with Tim. He was truly a gentleman, interesting to talk to, and seemed like the ideal man. Roseanne, you're a wonderful person. Oh, to say I'm wonderful. Compliments that people usually hesitate to say directly, he would utter without a hint of embarrassment. Before I knew it, I found myself thinking about Tim. After that, Tim and I started to see each other frequently, and on our third date, he confessed his feelings for me, and we became a couple. The time I spent with Tim was truly happy. Thanks to him, I was able somehow to manage the difficult job. Are you okay? Not too tired? Yeah, thank you. I tried not to show my fatigue in front of Tim, but it seems he knew everything. He always took care of me, hugging me gently each time. 2 years into such a life, Tim finally proposed to me. Of course, I accepted his proposal, and Tim and I became husband and wife. I will definitely make you happy. The smiling face of Tim saying that is something I can never forget. After that, we completed our family meeting and registered our marriage. Tim's mother, Marcia, is a very kind person, which was reassuring. His father had already passed away. If there's anything, feel free to talk to me about it. Yes, thank you very much. Surrounded by kind people, I felt incredibly fortunate. It seemed like I could overcome any hardship. I could only see hope in my future life. Yet, to get so entangled in something like this, I would later regret marrying Tim. Right after marrying Tim, a shocking truth came to light. Tim was completely incapable of doing any household chores. Sorry, I really can't do housework. What? How have you been managing until now? Well, I've been buying food from grocery stores or supermarkets, and when laundry piles up, I take it back to my parents' place, so I don't know how to use a washing machine. How could this be? Why hadn't I noticed this while we were dating? Whenever I visited Tim's house, it was always tidy, hardly the home of someone incapable of housework. From what I've heard, was Marcia taking care of the house cleaning? Or maybe he just tidied up superficially to make the room look presentable. Since then, I started teaching Tim how to do household chores. However, whether he didn't want to learn or couldn't learn, he was unable to do anything I taught him. Eventually, I gave up on teaching Tim and took on all the household chores myself. Though I found it tough at times, I got used to that lifestyle. About 2 years after getting married, having saved up some money, we bought a newly built single-family home. Living in a house rather than an apartment allowed us to enjoy our lives more freely, without worrying about noise. The neighbors were all nice, making our lives more comfortable than before. Tim and I each had our own spacious rooms, and I was happy to have more time to immerse myself in my hobbies. However, cleaning became quite a challenge. The apartment we had lived in was small, making cleaning relatively easy. But owning a house was a different story. Since Tim did none of the household chores, I ended up doing everything, even after we got our house. Tim seemed to have given up on learning household chores altogether, and never helped out, no matter how busy I was. It was after we bought the house that I started to notice something odd about Tim. He became distant. He began to pay less attention to me. He would respond indifferently to my attempts to converse, and I felt that he was coming home later and later. Perhaps it's normal after a few years of marriage, yet I couldn't help feeling lonely. Hey, what time will you be coming home today? I don't know. I see. Oh, here's your lunch. Rather than anger, I was swirling with feelings of sadness and anxiety. Had I unknowingly done something to make Tim dislike me? But no matter how much I thought about it, I couldn't pinpoint anything specific. Tim hadn't complained about anything to me, so maybe it wasn't something I needed to worry about. Eventually, I started to think that it was just Tim's true nature. That was the easiest way for me to make sense of it all. If he had been complaining about the food being bad, or the cleaning not done, it would have been a different story. There were other troubling behaviors from Tim. Despite coming home late, he never informed me of his expected return time. He would leave the lunch I made for him. Knowing I would clean, he would mess up the room as he pleased. Often, I found Tim's laundry scattered around the room. At first, I didn't make much of it, thinking he was just tired. However, as days passed, Tim made no effort to change his behavior. I couldn't stand it any longer and confronted him. Hey, can you stop? It seems like you're scattering things around, thinking I'll clean up after you. I work just like you. Managing household chores is already tough enough. Can't you be a bit more considerate towards me? Huh, are you saying I'm not considerate? Yes, if you really cared, you'd take care of your own stuff. And your room. When I entered to clean it last time, it was so dirty, I wondered how you could sleep there. Despite saying you're coming home late, you never tell me when. Don't you think you're overdoing it a bit? I vented all the frustration I had been holding back at Tim, but he wouldn't listen to me seriously. I'm tired, too. Cleaning is something you do, right? I've already told you I'd be home late, so what's the problem? You're just too uptight. Uptight, you say? In the end, Tim refused to listen to me. From that day on, Tim became even more distant. Not only would he give me indifferent responses, but he also started ignoring me altogether. Even when I cleaned Tim's room and took care of his surroundings, he stopped saying thank you. I thought many times about abandoning household chores altogether, but even if I did, Tim would likely just live in the mess. On the other hand, I couldn't stand the thought of living in filth. The idea of enduring discomfort in my own home was unacceptable to me. After much consideration, I decided to continue doing housework for my own sake. As time passed, I felt Tim's attitude might have returned to normal somewhat, but his coldness towards me remained unchanged. Should I be happy that he started telling me when he'd be home? Where did the Tim I knew before we got married go? I had no idea he was hiding such a side. If I had known, I would have reconsidered marrying him. I found myself living with stress from both work and home on a daily basis. About half a year into this routine, my work trips, which had been manageable, suddenly increased. There were day trips as well as overnight stays, and my life became incredibly hectic. Amidst this, I also had to manage household chores and take care of Tim. The burden on me became overwhelmingly large. Perhaps seeing me like this, Tim began to change his behavior gradually.
"Hey, Roseanne, are you okay?"
"What do you mean?"
"I mean, with the housework and work and everything."
"Yeah, well, I'm okay, I guess." I was taken aback by his sudden concern. Tim was worried about me, something incredibly rare. I thought it might as well rain spears tomorrow. After that, Tim seemed to worry about me more.
"Aren't you going on business trips a lot lately? Are you okay?"
"Yeah, I'm okay. It's tough, but it pays well."
"If you say you're okay, then that's good."
Was he hiding something? Or was he genuinely concerned? I had my doubts, but the fact that Tim showed concern made me happy. Still, Tim's late returns continued as usual. "Hey, why are you coming home so late these days?"
"Is it that often? I have my reasons, overtime, socializing with the boss."
"I see." Sure, the pay stub showed overtime pay. I could somewhat accept that he was out drinking with his boss, but it still felt excessive. Could Tim be having an affair? That thought crossed my mind. However, I couldn't see Tim as someone who would do such a thing. Despite everything, somewhere in my heart, I still trusted him. I couldn't understand why I was so convinced that Tim would never cheat. Even as my business trips increased, Tim made no effort to do household chores. Tim, who couldn't even heat up and retort curry, resorted to instant noodles or eating out. When I was away for long periods, he would specifically ask Marcia to come over. I had hoped he would learn to fend for himself during these times, but it seemed he had no such intentions. Rather than have the house get dirty, it felt safer to have Marcia over, but this surely increased her burden. "I'm sorry for causing you trouble because of my frequent trips." "It's okay, Roseanne, it's not your fault." "But it's about time Tim learned to do household chores properly. I'm worried about the future. Well, I can teach him any time, but—" "Yes, you're right. I'll speak to him too." "Will you? Thank you." Marcia's words were kind, but her tone seemed somewhat cold. Of course, Tim had no idea Marcia and I had such conversations. He continued to lounge on the sofa, watching TV as if nothing was different.
"This show is really interesting."
Forgetting I was in the kitchen, Tim called out to me. "What show?"
"Oh, sorry. Were you washing the dishes, Roseanne?"
Even as he said this, there was no sign of remorse in his demeanor. Initially, this attitude of his infuriated me, but now I've grown completely accustomed to it. I find it sad that I've come to accept this. However, the day when this way of life would end finally arrived. One day, I was offered an opportunity to go on an overseas business trip. It was a stressful job, but it also offered a sense of fulfillment. I could have declined, but I decided to accept it as a challenge. The duration of the trip was to be 2 years. During this time, I hoped Tim would either go back to his parents' home or try his best to manage the household chores on his own. When I told him about the trip that night, he was shocked.
You're going on a trip for that long?
Yeah, I could have said no, but I wanted to give it a try. It means I'll be putting a lot of burden on you, though. It was certain that we wouldn't see each other for a while. I would have been happy if you felt even a little sad about it, but it seemed Tim didn't have much of such feelings.
Got it. Do your best. I'll manage somehow on my own.
He said this with a broad smile. Are you sure you'll be okay?
Yeah, I'll be fine.
His reaction made it seem like he couldn't wait for me to leave. Months after the overseas trip was announced, the day to depart finally arrived. Are you really okay?
Don't worry about me. If anything happens, I'll just ask Mom for help.
Right.
Are you sure you're not running late?
Oh, I might be. I need to go now. It appeared Tim really wanted me to leave quickly. He probably wanted to enjoy some time alone. I was honestly upset, but there was no time for complaints. I bid Tim farewell and left the house. For the next 2 years, I worked overseas. Despite the challenges, it was an enjoyable experience that enriched my life. This experience will serve as nourishment for my life. I was convinced of that. Even while I was abroad, I kept in regular contact with Tim. Hearing he was getting by with Marcia's help brought me relief. Initially, our main form of communication was through phone calls, but gradually we shifted to exchanging emails. From his messages, I could tell Tim was doing well, which meant I didn't have to worry too much. 2 years later, my assignment ended, and I was finally able to return home. I was excited about the prospect of seeing Tim again. My steps were light with anticipation. He was supposed to have the day off, so I expected him to be home as usual. I wanted to hear about his life during my absence and share my own experiences. With excitement, I unlocked the front door. But my excitement quickly vanished. A nauseating stench wafted through the air. The odd sensation made me break out in a cold sweat instantly. I felt something was terribly wrong. I set down my luggage and began to explore the house. Where was the source of the smell? Where was Tim? My hands trembled as I opened each room's door. Finally, I opened the door to Tim's bedroom. What is this? I couldn't believe the scene before my eyes. What in the world? To my shock, there was Tim, mummified. I couldn't comprehend what was happening in front of me. Police! I need to call the police! I quickly took out my mobile phone and contacted the police. The police arrived at the house within minutes. As they proceeded with their investigation, naturally, I, being the first person to discover the scene, was questioned. Given that we had been emailing up until just before the end of my business trip, suspicions arose that perhaps someone else was involved. I've been on a business trip for about 2 years, and this is what I came back to?
A business trip, I see.
If the trip seems curious, you can verify it with my company. I truly just returned. So, can I show you my plane ticket and other evidence?
May we see that, please?
I complied with the police's request, providing them with contact information from my company and evidence like my plane ticket. As a result, they believed my story to be true. But this led to more perplexing questions. Who had been replying to my emails? It was odd that Tim hadn't sought help from anyone until his demise, and it seemed likely someone from work would have visited the house before things got to this point. I shared these concerns with the police and showed them the emails as evidence.
Indeed, there's been recent correspondence.
What does this mean? The more I thought about it, the more my mind reeled. The police seemed suspicious as well and decided to launch a full investigation. When the initial discussion was over, I suddenly remembered Marcia. I spoke to the police and then immediately contacted Marcia. Marcia? Tim is... As I explained the situation, Marcia's voice shook. Is that true? Oh my! Yes, I've called the police and they're investigating now. Understood. I'm coming over right now. Marcia hung up and arrived at our house within 10 minutes due to the proximity of our homes. Tim! Please try to stay calm. How can I stay calm when my son is dead? Marcia tried to push past the police to get to Tim. Understandably, losing one's son is a profound sorrow, a fact even I, who have no children, can grasp. Roseanne, when? When did you find Tim? Just now. I literally just got back, and then... Oh, dear! Sorrow filled Marcia's eyes. We were then briefed by the police about the next steps. Throughout this, Marcia held my hand and stayed close, her body trembling. A few days later, the police shared the results of their inquiries. Apparently, a woman other than Marcia had been visiting the house in my absence. Just hearing about her made her sound suspicious. Upon asking for a description, it turned out to be a woman I didn't recognize. I didn't know any women who would have reason to come and go from our house. Fortunately, Tim hadn't locked his mobile phone, so I checked it immediately after speaking with the police. Then, the name of a woman caught my eye. Emily? From the content of the emails, it was clear she was someone Tim worked with, but it felt like their relationship was more than just professional. Meeting up, movies, drinks. What became apparent after a brief look was that Tim and this woman named Emily seemed to be having an affair. The emails were peppered with mentions of hotel dates, among various other things. It appeared she had been coming and going from our house, taking care of Tim while I was away on business. This can't be. Did you find something? I informed the police about Emily's existence, and that she must have been the one entering and leaving the house. The police checked the emails, agreed with my suspicion, and decided to contact her directly to inquire further. A few days later, I was contacted again by the police. Apparently, Emily wanted to meet me. Despite having an affair, she had the nerve to want to meet me, Tim's wife. With all that had been happening, I couldn't help but think such thoughts. According to the police, Emily was claiming to have nothing to do with it. This only made me more curious about who had been sending the emails. All right, in a week then. Amidst growing questions, I decided to meet with Emily. Perhaps she knew something. What did she think about the affair after all? Eager for the truth, I looked forward to that day. A week later, I went to the specified meeting room to face Emily. Someone involved in an affair. I expected someone without principles. However, my preconceptions were quickly overturned. I'm truly sorry. Excuse me? For having an affair with Tim and coming to your house so many times? I know it's unforgivable. I'm really sorry. Emily immediately bowed her head upon seeing me. Oh, sorry for being so abrupt. No, it's okay, but what was your relationship with Tim? I asked Emily how she met Tim, and what their relationship was before becoming involved in the affair. As expected, her answer confirmed my suspicions. Apparently, Emily and Tim had a superior-subordinate relationship at work. Emily was assigned as Tim's direct boss. Initially, they were just colleagues, but their relationship deepened over time, eventually becoming physical. She had been entering our house even during my business trip, taking care of Tim. But then, Emily revealed something shocking. I didn't know Tim had passed away. I only found out from the police. That's odd, isn't it? What happened to the company? Tim quit the company over a year ago. He quit? Yes, he said he was fed up with everything, and it's difficult to say, but Tim wanted to divorce you and marry me. He said we could live on my salary, so he didn't need to work anymore. I was at a loss for words at Tim's selfishness. To think of divorcing me to marry Emily, and then quitting his job because they could live on her salary. I was a bit shocked to realize Tim was far more self-centered than I had imagined. Thank you for sharing this with me. No problem. But You didn't know he had passed away, right? When did you stop coming to the house? About a year ago, I think. Why? Didn't Tim want to marry you? My words might have come out harshly. However, Emily proceeded to explain what had happened. For several months after I went on my business trip, Emily had been visiting our house once every 5 days, ostensibly to take care of Tim. Initially, she seemed to enjoy it, as if they were experiencing newlywed life, finding it fun. However, that feeling quickly vanished due to Tim's lack of life skills. Despite her efforts to get him to clean up after himself, Tim never seemed to take heed, and Emily's feelings for him cooled off entirely. She broke up with him and ceased visiting the house. By that time, she had already quit her job, so Tim kept contacting her, wanting her to come back. Please come back. I want to start over. Messages varied, but they all shared a common theme of wanting to reconcile. However, Emily no longer harbored such feelings and ignored all his attempts. Eventually, the messages stopped. Since then, Emily had no idea what became of Tim. I see. Yes. I'm glad I could hear about what happened while I was away, thank you. Of course, I'm truly sorry for everything. Emily seemed genuinely remorseful, repeatedly apologizing to me. I understood her sincerity, but whether I could forgive her was another matter. Fortunately, Emily offered to pay compensation, which I accepted. It was clear she wasn't largely involved in the recent developments, but this only deepened the mystery. Amidst all this, the police, having spoken with neighbors, came across a significant lead. Apparently, a few days before I returned home from my trip, someone saw Marcia entering our house. With this eyewitness account, the police began to view Marcia with suspicion. If true, Marcia must know something. Curious, I checked Tim's mobile phone again and reviewed the emails. Until now, it hadn't occurred to me that Marcia might know something, so I hadn't checked her email specifically. Looking back, I realized, had I reviewed all the emails from the beginning, things might not have escalated to this point. I went through each email carefully. One particular email caught my eye. Are you feeling unwell? Around the time Emily left him, Tim fell ill. In such a condition, unable to seek help from Emily or me, Tim reached out to Marcia. However, Marcia's response was indifferent. Figure it out on your own? Furthermore, Marcia had made remarks suggesting she was tired of taking care of him. I'm tired of looking after you. I don't care what happens to you. It was hard to believe that Marcia, who seemed to care deeply for Tim and was profoundly saddened by his death, could say such things. But it was clear Marcia was involved somehow. Seeing Marcia's emails confirmed my suspicions. After presenting these emails to the police, it was decided to bring Marcia in for questioning. The police contacted Marcia, and a meeting was arranged at the police station for a later date. I was allowed to be present, so I decided to attend. Upon arrival, Marcia seemed upset. Isn't the culprit caught? What about that woman who was taking care of Tim? Calm down, please. After being cautioned by the police, Marcia glared at us with crossed legs. The police then explained that neighbors had seen Marcia visiting the house until recently and discussed the emails. Neighbors saw me. There's no proof of that. That woman is far more suspicious than I am. But you were entering the house until recently, weren't you? Where's the proof? We've heard from not just one, but several neighbors. How do you explain that? Marcia seemed increasingly frustrated, angrily retorting to the police. Watching her, I became even more convinced of her involvement. Marcia, are you sure you don't know anything? I don't know anything. Is that true? How long did you continue visiting that house? I don't remember. What about the testimonies from the neighbors? Are you suggesting the police are lying? Or that the neighbors have conspired against you? That's right. I don't think there's any reason for them to go out of their way to frame you, Marcia. Unless, do you have any reason to believe the neighbors would do such a thing? Despite being obviously suspicious, Marcia claimed to know nothing. Irritated by her attitude, I pressed her hard.
Eventually, after initially insisting on her innocence, Marcia finally admitted to a shocking truth.
Yes, I abandoned Tim. Are you happy now? Marcia! Because he was annoying.
I had somewhat understood, but it turns out Marcia was the one who abandoned Tim in that state. The reason being simply that she found him annoying, a shockingly selfish reason.
Annoying? I was tired of him always relying on me. Just when I thought he had finally married, he started depending on me for every little thing again. He wouldn't learn to do any household chores, always leaving everything to others. I looked after him because I was supposed to be his parent, but honestly, I hated it. Then, when he got sick and asked me to come over, I saw it as an opportunity, so I left him alone. Next thing I knew, he was gone.
Marcia shared her feelings about Tim in a detached manner. But these were not the emotions a parent should have for their child. They were twisted feelings. So, you were the one replying to my emails?
Yes, that was me. I thought if I suddenly stopped replying, you would worry. I knew it would come out eventually, but I thought it might buy some time.
You knew it would come out?
Of course. But then this Emily person appeared. I thought maybe I could pin the blame on her, but that didn't work out.
Marcia seemed frustrated. I couldn't believe Marcia had abandoned Tim. While part of me couldn't believe it, I remembered something she said before my trip.
We need to teach him household chores, or I'm worried about what will happen in the future.
Perhaps Marcia had already disliked Tim by then. To try and pin the blame on someone else?
Well, I had no other choice. I didn't want to deal with the police. If Emily had taken all the blame, I wouldn't have had to come here.
That's too selfish. Even if my frequent business trips increased your burden, you didn't have to abandon him.
Shut up! You don't understand how I feel.
Marcia lashed out at me, as if venting all her frustrations. But I stood my ground. I understand some of your feelings, Marcia. Tim never learned to do any chores and always made a mess. And then there was the affair. I was furious too. But there's a line you don't cross. What you did is a crime. This fact will follow you for the rest of your life, won't it? As I earnestly spoke to her, Marcia seemed to realize the gravity of her actions. She would have to live with the fact that she abandoned her son. The weight of that realization.
This will follow me.
Tears started to stream down Marcia's face.
I did such a thing.
Please, think about what you've done. As I said this, Marcia nodded weakly. And soon after, she was taken to another room. Surrounded by police, Marcia, being moved, looked smaller than ever. Eventually, Marcia was arrested for neglecting Tim's corpse. The exact charges she will face are yet to be determined, as the trial is pending. Hearing Marcia's story, I couldn't help but feel some sympathy. I too had been exasperated by Tim's actions countless times, but there are limits to what is acceptable. I hope Marcia truly reflects on her actions. After Marcia's arrest, I moved out immediately. Somehow, I just couldn't bear to stay in that house any longer. Now I live alone in a nice apartment. Doing chores and laundry for just myself is much easier, but I can't help but have lingering thoughts about Tim. If this had been a divorce, perhaps, I could have moved on more clearly. But to part ways like this, losing a husband in such a manner, has made me realize how much I truly cared for Tim. To distract myself from these futile feelings, I immerse myself in work every day.